So for the air conditioning on-off switch, it's usually pretty easy to do. Stock switch, so all you need is a multimeter, stick it on resistance, and then on the back of this switch, it has these 3 electrical wires that are connected to that switch. So when you ohm it out, you want to see where you get a connection with the air conditioning settings, but not the heat settings. So I've already done this, gone through all the combinations. And on this one, if you connect the outer 2 wires, in off you get no connection. Max AC, you get a connection. Normal AC, connection. Blend, connection. Vent, no connection, because you don't need it. Heat, no connection. Blend, connection. And defrost, you get a connection. So that's all you need to do is figure out which wires are the connection for your air conditioning settings. Like I said, in my case, it's the outer 2. And since I've converted all this to a lot of different things, I don't really need that anymore. So then in the vehicle, I'll just figure out which one of these 2 is the power, and then I'll run the other wire. So on this type, it's pretty easy to do. If you have a different type, you'll have to figure it out. Another option is you can put just an on-off switch, like you can drill a hole and stick it somewhere on the dash for on-off for air conditioning. Run 12 volts to it and just flip that on whenever you're going to run the air conditioning or want the air conditioning. So with the heater controls out, what I did was, this is the connector that I showed you where I've got the 3 connections for the AC signal. So I checked these with my meter, with the ignition on, and this is my 12 volt constant hot. And this is the one that I need to go for the signal. And on mine, it's a green wire. Yours might be different. So then I took one of my spare connectors and I just popped it open. It's just 2 little clips on the side. And then these connectors come out. Except for when I'm filming. And then they don't come out. But these connectors come out. So I took the wire off. So then I made this, which all this is, that's the connector I took out. I re-crimped it, resoldered it onto this wire. This was just a spare wire I had removed from a harness, and this thing should be plenty long. So now we're going to take the stock wire here, we're going to pop this apart and replace it. See, that just unclips. Then we'll take my new wire and I'll plug it into here. And clip that back together. And now we got my connections. Now we'll test this. I'm just going to plug in the one plug for testing. Alright. I'm going to turn it on and see if I get voltage with the ignition off. So with the ignition off, we're not hot. Now let's turn the ignition on. Ignition on, not hot. We'll go through our positions and see if that changes. Alright, so see with max AC, we now have 12 volts on this wire. Normal AC, 12 volts. Bi-level AC, 12 volts. Vent, no volts. Heat, no volts. Blend, 12 volts. And frost, 12 volts. So that's what we want. So now I need to run this wire through the firewall. So then what happens is, inside the vehicle, I turn the air conditioning to an on position. 12 volts comes out, goes down to pin 30 on the relay, which comes out pin 87A on the relay, which sends 12 volts to my air conditioning compressor clutch. Turns the compressor on. Compressor starts spinning, starts building pressure on the high side, which in turn builds pressure on the low side. When the low cycle switch sees around 40 psi for the one I'm using, it completes the circuit, or closes, between 86 and ground, which grounds out my relay. So now when 86 is grounded, I already have 12 volts going to pin 85 from my switch, completes that circuit, and kicks pin 30 over to 87 and opens 87A, which shuts off power to my compressor and shuts it off. As soon as that pressure goes below 40, it's usually around like 35, this will open again, which will then divert power back to 87A, clutch kicks on again. So that's how I'm cycling my compressor. And you can do this pretty much with any compressor out there. So then that same setup on paper I've got over here wired up already. So right here I've got a relay. This is of course all just temporary laying in here so we can do testing and everything. So I have that relay wired exactly how I showed you. This green wire here is the wire that's coming from my air conditioning on switch in the dash. Then I have it going through the relay. Then I have a 10 amp fuse also. And then this wire right here goes to the air conditioning clutch, and this is the pin for that. Then from the clutch, I have a ground wire right here, which I just have alligator clipped to my battery. And then I also have my low pressure switch over there, low pressure cycling switch, which also has a ground alligator clipped together. So that way I can test power to my clutch without actually having the clutch plugged in. That way you don't fry anything. So about an hour ago, I just put 1 can of refrigerant in, and it was at 50 psi, and it's still holding at 50 on the high and low. I mean, they're the same, they equalize. So that tells me my pressure's holding, all my seals are good. So now I'm ready to start testing and test this clutch out. So first I have the vehicle completely in the off position. And we're going to check all our wires for voltage. So the first thing I'll check is my wire coming out of my vehicle. So this is the wire going to my air conditioning switch. I have no voltage on that. And check my AC compressor. Of course there should be no voltage, and there isn't. Alright, then I'm going to disconnect my low pressure cycling switch, and this will just simulate when there is no pressure in the system. So now I'm going to go turn the key forward. So now with the key forward, air conditioning off, I should have no voltage on any of these wires. And I don't, so we're good. So now I'm going to go turn the air conditioning on. So now my air conditioning is in the on position, and I should be seeing voltage from this wire that comes out of my on switch, and I do, I got 12 volts there. I should also have 12 volts at my compressor on the green wire. And I do. So right now my clutch would be engaged. And I'm just going to check these ground wires, make sure there's nothing weird going on. And there's no power. So now I'm going to screw in my low pressure cycling switch, which will show it 50 psi, which will make it close, complete the circuit, and it should shut the power off to the compressor. I don't know if you heard that click there, but that was the click of things cycling. So now that the low pressure cycling switch sees 50 psi, I should have no power on my green wire, and I don't, so my clutch would shut off at this point. So it looks like our wiring's good, so now I'm ready to plug this in and test out the actual compressor. So there's one little issue I ran into by running my air conditioning as its own standalone electrical system, and that is when the air conditioning is turned off, your high side and your low side equalize pressure, and they're both around 100 psi. So that activates the cycling switch, which turns the clutch off. So then when you turn your air conditioning back on, the clutch won't engage. Compressor won't turn on, system won't do anything. So what I'm assuming, and I couldn't find any information on it, I'm assuming the PCM engages the air compressor like at the beginning of your cycle and does it all automatically. So what I did is I tied in another wire to my fuse on the power side. This is the clutch side. So then I ran this all the way through the firewall, and it comes out here in the car right here. Ran it up to where the air conditioning controls are. Then I have that running to an on-off switch. And then that on-off switch is powered by the same wire I used back here for when I turn my air conditioning on. So now, when I turn my air conditioning on, it powers this switch, and then I can manually turn my air conditioning clutch on and off. And in testing, what I found is I only need to run it for about 10 seconds at the beginning when I first turn the air conditioning on, and then after that it just does everything automatic. So that's the solution I did for that. I'm just going to mount that little guy right here. So it's a little bit of an annoyance. You got to do it every time you turn the air conditioning on, but it's really not that big a deal. So I got that wired in right there. So since my air conditioning system is its own standalone electrical system, I needed to activate fan 1 whenever the air conditioning is on to help with the condenser. So I added a second relay to my fuse box here, and all I did, this is the power wire coming from when I turn the air conditioning on, and it goes to that relay, and then that relay has a ground, and then this is another ground. So pin 30 is a ground on this one. So this completes a ground circuit. And then this wire runs to my fan 1 PCM wire that activates the relay for fan 1 from the PCM. I just spliced them together. You can have multiple ground signals to that wire, and it doesn't affect the PCM at all. So now when I turn the air conditioning on, it activates that relay just for ground for the fan. So here's the setup. I need to get a better switch. This is just what I had laying around, but I'll do something more permanent. So basically the way it works, to run air conditioning, first I turn it to one of the air conditioning settings. Then I flip this switch on, which is my clutch override switch. Leave it on for about 10 seconds. That charges the system. Then I shut it off, and then it stays in air conditioning, and it continues to run the air conditioning unless that low pressure cycle switch shuts it off. So I still have that safety feature. I'm just overriding it with this switch, and it's working fine. It's just a little bit ghetto, obviously. I'll see if I can find some kind of a latching relay. I think that might be the way to go, where when I turn the air conditioning on, it latches a relay for 5 or 10 seconds and then kicks that relay off, and that'll do the same thing as this switch is doing. So let's turn it on, show you how it works. I wanted to explain it because with the engine running, I don't think you can hear me. Now with that turned off, I got my air conditioning blowing cold, and it'll keep doing that until I switch this to off. You can hear the engine tone change a little bit because the compressor kicked off when I turned that to off, so everything's working like it should. I can go over to vent, crank some heat, and I know you got no way to feel the temperature with me, but it's working. Gets hot, gets cold. So that's it. That's how you can set up a basic air conditioning swap. So doing a standalone air conditioning like this, where it's just the compressor, the simple switch here, which has power for air conditioning, and then some type of on-off, you can set up your air conditioning into any LS swap. It's completely independent of the computer. The only downside is if you need a higher idle for the air conditioning, which mine seems to be fine, but you can always raise the idle in the tune to like 50 RPM higher normally. That way when the air conditioning's on, it'll run fine. But this lets you use any compressor, any type of switches like this, anything. So that's it for this one. Air conditioning is basically done except for fixing this switch somehow. So that's it for this project.